Welcome to Beyond the Band-Aids, a podcast from Project PACT. PACT means police and community together. I'm Carol. I'm here with Mike and Kristin, and we're excited about this topic. We're going to really kind of talk through the last 5 years of what's happened with policing and how we look to the future in the world of policing and community together. And I want to bring Kristin and Mike into the conversation and just talk about their history of having conversations around shifting the culture of policing. Many people say institutions cannot shift; they are set in stone and traditional and very. They can't be moved. They just have to be torn down. And we don't believe that. We believe that mayors and city managers and police chiefs are all looking for ways to really bring in a new, fresh way of work and developing out trust and community safety and well-beingness. So, Mike, we've talked about several times, we've talked about the last 5 years, but I think you go back further. Over 40 years in law enforcement and 26 years sitting in the chair as a police chief and is retired. And, you came in with a fresh new perspective and developed a new culture within your own department. But talk more about what's happening in the nation and how we've dealt with the last 5 years when there's something that happens and we all get this uproar and things need to change and things need to shift and then it taps back down. So maybe kind of walk through that culture.
Thanks. And I think it's a worthy topic to every now and then revisit a little bit of our history to kind of get a sense for either how far we've come or how far we have to go. And so, but I would take it back further than 5 years initially, because I think the hue and cry in terms of shifting and changing cultures in police departments really became loud and magnified and amplified during, in August of 2014, when Ferguson, Missouri occurred. Whether you agree or disagree with how that was handled, that's when the spotlight became brighter in terms of what was going on for police. And then we saw those series of incidents that occurred in Cleveland, New York, Rochester, or other cities that around the country, that these things were videotaped and filmed and shocked, and for me personally, shocked my conscience in terms of some of the things I saw police departments do. And I know I'm not alone amongst police practitioners in this nation in terms of what happened and how did it get to this point. And there was a hue and cry for we need to change the culture. I can't tell you how many times I heard pundits or police professionals, practitioners, and academicians as well, active and retired, say, we need to change the culture of our police departments. And so, and then all of a sudden, we got another big dose of something that shocked our conscience, and that's what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd. Again, there's a difference of opinion in some minds in terms of what happened there. But I can tell you, good police officers all over this country were somewhat concerned about all of that in terms of what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd. And so there again lies the sense of, well, now what do we do? And so the amplification ratcheted up again in terms of we need to change our culture. We need to figure things out differently. And so what happened across the country, and we talked about this pre-program, is we approached police departments, organizations in public safety, and even in the criminal justice system as a problem to be solved, as something through the lens of deficiencies that wasn't working well. And there's no doubt that things needed to change. There's not an institution in this country, I don't care what industry, realm, or business we're talking about, that doesn't need to be shifted. In fact, in our school, we talk about the repurposing of institutions. What needs to happen in order for all of our institutions to become more service-oriented, less egocentric, and more selfless in terms of how they respond to the human condition or to the or to the concerns we have, whether it's business, banking, religion, education, government, beyond police, all those institutions need to take a strong look. So, but we're talking about police today. And so after George Floyd, another big hue and cry. But then things began to kind of wane. Things became less, as you know, we heard words like defunding the police, repurposing the police, and there were all those kinds of comments, and in terms of, and some cities actually did some of that. Some cities actually, they found themselves behind the eight ball once they were doing that. But on the other hand, they knee-jerk reacted in some of these things. And so, but again, I want to make the point that we responded to looking at all of our police officers and the police profession and the institution of our criminal justice system in a very negative light, through that lens of, here's what's wrong, here's what we need to be afraid of, versus saying, hey, and here's Project PACT's, here's our methodology, and that is what's working well. What do we want to see more of? What would we like to see expanded? What's good within that police department or in our policing profession? Well, how do we expand that so that when we expand those things, they naturally and evolutionarily kind of crowd out the things we don't want to see? For those of us who have raised children, for those of us who have been around in terms of trying to restructure or reculturize organizations, we know that that's really the only way it's going to work. And we have not yet tried that. We're still in that vein where we saw states like Colorado, the state I live in, knee-jerk react and pass laws that became very punitive and very retributive in terms of, if a police officer or police department does this, they're going to get punished. And so those things just didn't work. And so here we are 5 years later, and we're I can't say we've slid backwards, but we've kind of gone back to pre-August of 2014, in my mind, in terms of what's happening. Now, and we're still seeing events, we're still seeing videotapes and video film of police officers doing things in our country that would, again, kind of are shocking in terms of, why is this happening? And so I'm not saying there hasn't been some progress made, but I think we reached a diminishing point of return with some of that. And now with the last election, and I'm not going to get political about this, conservative, liberal, but there has been even more a sense of less urgency around shifting cultures within our police departments. By the way, I agree that we needed to shift our culture. I think Kristin did too. We needed to shift cultures, not only in our police departments, but as Project PACT discusses, we want to shift those cultures in our communities. And what paradoxically the police department's up against is that it really can't change itself until the community changes. And the community really can't really change all that much until police departments change in terms of the sense of safety. And so we have to work through that paradox. We have to work through that conundrum. And therein lies what Project PACT offers in terms of the instruction and the training around how to approach that paradox and how to move beyond the stuckness that we find our police departments still in. Because most of the responses by police departments, and that's the name for this particular podcast, were Band-Aids. They were Band-Aids. Let's body-worn cameras. Let's change our use of force policies or pursuit policies, or let's add a program. But we became very programmatic, and we still got involved in this. Police departments were very much involved in this mix of commodifying the human condition and seeing these needs and creating programs to address those needs. It's very programmatic, very hierarchical, very patriarchal, very sense of, we're here to fix you. And so people bought it because we still have this very consumer-like culture in our country where we think we can buy safety, or we think we can purchase satisfaction, or purchase parenting, or purchase something that will make us better, versus doing the hard work that we have to do in order to get to another level, another place. And so we commodified that human condition because of our consumer-like mindset. And so we're still very much there. We're still very much in that mode of how we see justice as a pound of flesh. We're still very much in that mode of believing that if we pass laws, or that if we stiffen penalties, that somehow these social and health issues will get resolved. And those things just don't work. And so we're still there. We're still stuck. But I also know, I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there are police chiefs, city managers, mayors, and communities that want something much deeper, much more, that has a lot more depth and a lot more comprehensiveness attached to it. We can't stay shallow in our approaches. We can't stay kind of minimally, give this a minimal kind of response. So anyway, that's where we're at. That's kind of where we're at this point. And so while we've made some minimal progress since August of 2014, the shifting of cultures has not happened in our police departments. It hasn't happened in our communities. We're still hungry for that. Let's not get kind of taken in by the illusion that something is going to happen that's better because there's a new president or because there's a new way of seeing things. Even the Department of Justice is saying no more consent decrees. We've talked about consent decrees. I have personally called them Band-Aids myself because they never addressed the culture. But that's just another example of backing off this sense of we need to make shifts. We need to make changes still in the institution of policing so that they can really act in authentic partnership with our communities, and communities can begin to respond less unhealthily dependent and more interdependent in terms of how they are with each other and how they are with the police department. So I'm going to leave it at that for now.
Yeah, changing the mindset. And I'm going to come back to you on some of the specifics around the legal and maybe how that affects culture. But Kristin, talk about what you've seen in the last 5 years.
Well, I want to first go back to what Mike said about culture change. Culture change is the key to transforming public safety. You can put a great policy in place, and without culture change and without a real understanding of how that works in practice, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to help. It's going to be a Band-Aid. Culture change is the most critical element of all of this. And I think Mike is absolutely right. All of these incidents over the last, going back to 2014, we've seen them pop up and we've seen the response and the reaction from the public. And then it's kind of faded out and we've gone back to the traditional way of doing things and the status quo. And it's difficult to sustain that kind of momentum toward change because we are so kind of bogged down by tradition. And I think in certain agencies, the leadership has made changing the culture a real priority. And those are the agencies that do start to build a better relationship with their community. And the community is more receptive because they see the effort being put in and the change that's happening. And I think we have to be really transparent about that process and that it's not easy, that it's that culture change is difficult and that it's generational. And that's something that Mike and I have talked a lot about. This isn't an instant change. You put a policy in place and all of a sudden everything's better. You have to be willing to put in the work. And I think the thing about what happened in 2020 with George Floyd is that it wasn't the first time we saw something that horrible happen. It was just the most visible in terms of the entire country watching and protests happening everywhere. It was the most widespread. And it felt like a turning point. And then since then, we've seen things kind of go back to the way they were. And that's frustrating. It's frustrating for police who are truly dedicated to public service. It's frustrating for community members who really were deeply invested in seeing things change. So I think we do have to really dig into the culture, and figuring out what is working well is a big part of that. But without being really committed to that long-term change, we're not going to see anything better come of it.
Okay, so Project PACT is here for the long term. Let's just say that. We are here for, and both of you are talking about this two-way street that happens. It can't happen just from the police department. The Department of Justice cannot put in training that goes just to police. It has to happen with the community. And so the community itself has to go through a mindset shift. I'm thinking about how technology changed everything for everyone. George Floyd was recorded and spread, and body cams are recorded and spread, and so we're dealing with an age of technology and maybe that's brought up a whole new level of transparency. Mike, you talked about Colorado shifted some of their laws, and I think they put into place a liability issue that they could go after a patrol officer or policeman individually if they make a mistake. Is that true?
Yeah, they did. They minimized the governmental immunity, and I'm not saying that shouldn't necessarily happen at some level, but the law they passed, I think it was in 2020, and I think it was actually Senate Bill 217, actually put in place some kind of punitive measures that if a police officer or a police department did these things, they're more likely to be sued, or they're more likely to use the protections that they've had in the past, even if they did something in good faith, or they couldn't get hired somewhere else if they made a mistake in good faith, or something along those lines. And so all of those things happened in 2020, shortly after George Floyd. And, the state, the legislature, and the governor saw that as a positive. I didn't. And I saw it as, it's just negative. And so the point I want to make here is, again, we think passing laws is going to serve as an insurance policy. In this case, it's going to protect us from the human condition. It really won't. It didn't, and it won't. And we need to go deeper with a lot of this. And that deeper means we move upstream and get away from just addressing the symptoms of things. And what these laws addressed were symptoms. They didn't address how do police departments shift and change cultures in a way that we're talking about here, in terms of how we can bring about that kind of partnership, that kind of vulnerability, that transparency, that sense that there's a level playing field, that sense that everyone's responsible for safety, not just the police. And that gets into the whole, and in the General Assembly in Colorado never addressed the community's responsibility. It only addressed police responsibility. It didn't address anything going on in our communities. And so we keep on missing that point. We keep on saying that it's the institution's responsibility. And that gets into that whole mode of dependency. That gets into that whole mode of someone else, the experts are responsible. The system providers are the ones that make things happen. Leaders are the cause and everybody else is the effect kind of mindset. And so that level of commitment, accountability, and action we need from the community has yet to be addressed. And in this 10 or 11 year period, I heard very few comments from 2014 to 2025, where this podcast is being made in July of 2025, about anything about community responsibility. What are the rights and responsibilities of community? We talk a lot about rights, but we don't talk a lot about responsibilities. What are the rights and responsibilities of citizens? That is a huge, huge piece that's going to have to shift and change, so that community realizes that safety is as much their responsibility as a lot of other things are. Again, this consumer-like culture we have kind of pushes that aside, that we can purchase our satisfaction, we can purchase our parenting, we can purchase our safety, we can purchase all these things. And so how do we move from consumer to citizen is going to become a big part of the transition that has to be made. And I can sit here and with a straight face and virtually guarantee that if citizens reclaim their citizenship, or just claim their citizenship to the level that we're talking about, that would automatically change the relationship they have with their police departments. And that strength that they would have, that sense of, I have power to do things in my neighborhood, in my community that I didn't know I could do, would automatically change so many different things in terms of what's happening. And so as we address laws and institutions and police departments, that's fine. We need to do that. And Project PACT is all about that, in terms of shifting and changing at a deep level cultures within police departments. But the thing that has to change even more so are the cultures of our communities, in terms of that sense of being very unhealthily dependent on government services and police in a way that just kind of puts a stranglehold on their sense of empowerment, their sense of they're being able to be the authors of their experience and their destiny.
Yeah. And I just want to say, from the brain, from the metacognitive point of view, I wanted to point out that statute that was passed by Colorado, because imagine being a police person in your work and having that fear of being, held personally liable. You could lose your home. You could lose all kinds of things if you make a mistake. And I think any culture where there is this fear-laden, you're going to make a mistake and you're going to pay, is not healthy. It's not healthy for the community. It's not healthy for the police department. It's not healthy for the brain. It's not healthy for a neighborhood. It's just, it triggers all of those things that can lead to mistrust.
Well, and that's why a lot of police officers, one of the reasons why a lot of police officers left the profession, and the police profession became less attractive to people looking for a career in their lives, whether you're 30, in your 40s, 30s, or 20s. And so we've seen the results of that kind of coming down hard on the police profession play out in terms of their inability to recruit, their inability to retain. And so a lot of things have happened in that arena too, in terms of, I can tell you when I was working the role of public safety chief, we expanded the attributes and characteristics and qualities we wanted to see in our police officers. And we didn't minimize those. In fact, because we were a profession at that point that was very attractive to people looking for a career or something that they could do to make a difference in their communities or the world. So right now, that doesn't exist as much, and so there's lots of choices too for people to make in terms of their careers. What can we do? And we talked about this in a previous podcast. What can we do as a police profession to make ourselves more attractive to people looking for a career or maybe changing careers midstream, in their 20s and 30s? We hired a lot of people who were social work, youth ministers, people who were teachers, people who were doing other things, other professionals from other environments, because we were that kind of organization that said, we can make a difference in our community. And here's how that looks.
You knew they had that maturity and that sense of civic responsibility. And I want to talk about this pattern that we've seen: tragedy, and then reform talk, and then the police retreat, and then it repeats with the next tragedy. And so how do we move beyond this pattern, this theme of, and we think it's through our training, through our facilitating, through new conversations. Mike and I are having bi-weekly conversations with our community around a number of topics. And it's beautiful to watch conversations, people come together who might have been polarized, might have been kind of in their tribes, and now they're starting to interact and discover. And
so we could go down, we could take a look at a relationship, a simple relationship between two people. It could be two men, friends, whatever, a woman and a man, friends, or intimate relationship. And if there's a power imbalance, and if one feels much more dependent, or if one feels a sense of powerlessness and the other feels that sense of powerfulness, that relationship is not healthy. And if we want to get beyond these kinds of cycles that we're in, these stalemate-like cycles that we're in, we're going to have to enhance that sense of power in the community, that sense of going from that dependency to that interdependency, much like what we see in healthy relationships where two people are operating off the same level playing field. And when that happens, relationships are healthier. And so that relationship that exists between the police and the community they serve has to kind of go through that same metamorphosis. And we have not yet even gotten close to doing that. And so one has all the power in terms of here's what we can do. And here one thinks that they don't have the power, and they defer to the people that have the power. And so when you see those kinds of relationships, whether they're two people or between entities like the police and the community, what's going to happen? Unhealthiness is going to happen. These cycles are going to repeat. We're going to continue to see the tragedies, or we're going to continue to see the ebbs and flows of that sense of what's not working well. And so that sense of having the same level of choice and the same level of knowledge, the same level of capacity to kind of bring about safety is where this needs to go. Like, we can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah. Community members need to be equal stakeholders in the conversation around public safety.
So, and Kristin, talk more to that. How do you, so many people, so many citizens have been told, just call 911, just report the emergency. They don't think they have agency. They don't think they have permission. They have lost touch with neighbors in their neighborhood. They don't even know, we're talking about a new generation that has lived on their phones, and they don't know how to have a conversation with somebody, much less a difficult conversation. So talk more about, how the community becomes a stakeholder in as an individual, as nonprofit groups, or, however we're doing it, versus showing up at a protest and saying, defund the police.
Sure. I mean, I think part of it is exactly what you're saying, getting involved in local nonprofits or programs in your community, getting more active about interacting with your neighborhood. I think it's also partially on the police department and city management and others to create space for those initial conversations. And, Mike was talking about the power dynamics in a relationship, and that's exactly what it is. I think a lot of community members don't feel that they have the agency or the ability to get out there and be more involved in what public safety looks like, because they see the police as the authority or as more powerful than they are. And I think we need to level that and have honest conversations about everyone's needs. And the police are stakeholders in public safety and in the health of the community, just like the average community member is. Police are invested in the community, and so are people who aren't within the police department. And we need to make that really clear, make it an open conversation about what those initial needs are and what the plan is going forward to keep lines of communication open, to create interaction that builds trust, to create programs that create better community safety. All of that starts with communication.
Yeah. So being in alignment, that the citizens are in alignment with the police and the purpose.
I think everyone needs to get on the same page, and that might look really different initially, but there is a point where maybe you compromise a little bit of what the ideal looks like for you, but we find a solution that is greater for the whole.
Yeah. As I was going through my notes this morning, I had this vision of a tug-of-war. You remember when you were all kids and you got on the rope and you had one team here and you had another team here and you just kept pulling against each other. And I thought, boy, that's what it's felt like with police and community safety and trust. We're going to pull this way. Oh, no, we're pulling this way. But what if we all were pulling the same direction? What would happen?
And nobody wins like that. That goes back to that pattern that you mentioned of tragedy and reform and, and go back to the status quo.
Retreat, repeat. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's just put this in context of, if that's the state of policing, and the state of policing is very much tied to the state of community. And we want to make that point really clear, that that's where this needs to go. If we're going to move beyond, if we're going to transcend, transform, and do something that kind of is timeless, our communities have to become healthier. They have to become less dependent. They have to own the power that they have. And there's ways of doing that through conversations. And I will come back and say, because we did it in our community of 100,000 people, that there are ways of police departments because they sit in that catbird seat. They're in the community 24/7, 365, our neighborhoods. They know everybody more so than anybody else in municipal government, state government, definitely federal government. because they have this still very legitimate platform, because people, for the most part, really want the police to be successful and effective. And so they want that, and we need that. But that the police can play this role, and Project PACT makes the case that our police departments can be that fulcrum, that leverage point that can bring about us a level of healthiness in our communities that needs to happen, so that power imbalance dissipates or is eliminated. And so there are ways of police departments, if they can change their cultures and start working in partnership internally, that our police officers working in this departments are going to see, here's what partnerships look like. Here's how that plays out, and can begin to mirror that in the community. And then have the kinds of discussions that can elicit that level of accountability, that commitment, and action. And so a lot of police departments, a lot of government folks will tell you even today, that in July of 2025, that bringing in the community is messy. Of course it is. But we have to figure out how to kind of orchestrate and work with that messiness. And so people in relationships can be messy. Great. But this is our relationship. Let's make it work. And so all those things have to play out in ways that the community can find its strength and operate from that level playing field.
I love that comparison. I think raising children is messy, very messy. And then they become adults, they mature, and they accept responsibility, and they become really beautiful people. And I just kind of want to frame that around how this, the community is acting as children in regards to police.
Well, they don't want to be, but it's at some level, this patriarchal mindset kind of keeps them there. And you said it earlier, people don't want to give the community permission to act on its own, to take what matters into their own hands. They're afraid to do that because there's this loss of power, because we are so needs-based in our own systems and institutions that our own lifestyles sometimes are based on the needs of others. And because those needs exist, we kind of encourage those professionals and those experts to kind of take care of us. I can't tell you how many times I've heard we could solve our problems in our community if they just had, I'm talking to people in government, if we just had more of me, so to speak, in terms of more resources, more government, more sense of because we know the needs, we know the problems, we know the solutions. I went to school and I learned about how to do all these things. And so we don't need the community's involvement. Just let us take care of it. That's the mindset that needs to go away. And we need to start opening it up so that people feel comfortable in saying, I can play a part in being a citizen and reclaiming my own citizenship in ways where I can make my neighborhood stronger. I can make my community stronger. I can help deal with health and social issues in this community that I have never been able to do before. People have gifts. They just don't know it. And helping people understand what those gifts are, helping them leverage those gifts, and then creating a place for them to be involved in all of this. We have to start. And so that's what hasn't, very little of that has happened. And even as I look at sometimes the more progressive police departments in this country, or sometimes the national police organizations, that 3 of them that I'm a part of, they still haven't caught on to that idea yet. That community is the secret sauce here. The strengthening of community is where this is going to happen. And that strengthening can happen through our police departments. I'm not saying other entities in municipal government can't help, but they're not in the community 24/7, 365. Many of those government departments are 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. And so it's like, how do we do that? How do we move forward? And just, again, we're going to say, if you want to know a little bit more about, if you're interested, or if this piques your interest at all, curiosity, give us a call, projectpact.org. That's where our contact information is at. Let us have a conversation with you, and you can shut us down and say no to us, or you can say, I'd like to know more.
Yeah, it's free. It's a free conversation, and I guarantee you it will be a transforming conversation. I thought the world has said, well, we just need to hire more social workers, and for the police department. And I think, oh no, maybe the neighbor needs to walk next door and just knock on the door and be that caring person in a neighborhood. And yet. I do want to get to this other side and kind of talk about the goodness that is in policing and what is expanding, because we are seeing some reduction we're seeing reductions in violent crime. We're seeing some reduction in property crimes. And not to say that may not ebb and flow and come back, but do you think that we're moving to a place where people are becoming a little more responsible to their communities, to their civic mindedness?
Yeah, the social scientists, we don't know yet. And because these things are so short-lived and so temporary, and they have been short-lived and temporary throughout history in terms of these ebbs and flows of crime trends. And by the way, what I hear is sometimes where there's a city that here's their magic, and their magic caused the crime to go down. And another city kind of describes another kind of magic and completely different than that other city, their crime has gone down. And so there's something countrywide that may be happening. And I always have hope that there's a trend attached to this and that it's not short-lived. But my own history says these things tend to be short-lived. And so there may be another repeat thing here going on. I've been through these ebbs and flows of crime reduction and crime increases, and I never get too high or too low, depending on what direction it's going. But I have hope that maybe this is the one. Maybe this is the one where we begin to see less and less of something. And I will also say that kind of thinking matches the trajectory and trend lines that people like Steven Pinker have talked about in Enlightenment Now, and other people have talked about in terms of trajectories of what's happening in society, in terms of societies becoming safer, more literate, less hunger, a greater longevity, fewer accidents, etc. And so we're moving in that direction over the long term, over the decades and centuries. But is this current drop in crime that we're seeing all over the country, is it going to stay with us? It's going to get better? Is it even going to drop less? We don't know yet. These are 5 to 10 year cycles that have to happen. And I've not ever seen a 5 or 10 year cycle in drop in crime, or maybe 5 years, but 10 years, not as likely. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see where this goes. But I have my fingers crossed that there's something emerging in terms of evolution. And that's another thing we talk about in our instruction, is how to become a partner with evolution so that you can begin to see these trajectories and these momentum, the momentum and inertia of how do you attach yourself to that, so you can begin to see more easily these windows of opportunity to accelerate the ball down that evolutionary track if you're in a high leverage position in an organization. And so those things can happen, and we teach people what that looks like and how to find those windows too. So.
Yeah, I just, Kristin, do you have any closing thoughts on changing culture and paradigm shifts? Not a big topic at all, but.
Well, I think the vision of this shared sense of public safety and these healthy communities, it happens when the entire community moves from being consumers to being collaborators. And I think more and more police agencies and cities are beginning to see that and to, make sure that the public has a voice in what's happening. And I think culture change, we have to be patient and steadfast and keep it moving forward. I think we have to recognize that it is not an immediate fix. It's a long-term process.
Yep. And I love to talk about, the training that's involved with Project PACT really works on self-leadership, civic responsibility, commitment, action, accountability. And then really into the service mindedness of servant leadership. And I will just say from that point of view, every person that can kind of shift into that culture, that can become that person that works with the public, that weaves the public together in the social fabric of a beautiful, safe and healthy community, has a great satisfaction. That is a profession that we should all take on. Mike, any last words?
We've covered all the bases. I have hope. And I just want to say, one last word is this sense of police idealism that sometimes gets kind of backshelved for us, but it is a form of social capital. And it is something we need to leverage because a lot of our new police officers, younger and older new police officers, have this sense that they want to make a difference in our communities. And I think it's important for us to recognize that idealism is a form of social capital that needs to be identified, sustained, and expanded as police officers go through their careers. They shouldn't get more cynical or less hopeful or more begrudging towards the community or not begin to dislike the community. It should go the opposite way, and that should expand. And you're going to know when your culture is healthy, when that happens. That's one of the earmarks. It's one of the benchmarks, is you got a 10, 15, 20-year officer who's saying, I love what I'm doing because it's making a difference in the community. I love what's going on here because I'm in partnership with this community in ways, and we're making things happen in terms of bringing about safety or helping maybe a wayward teenager find a different path or whatever that might be. Those are the things that after 10, 15, 20 years, police officers should be thinking about and saying in terms of that's why this is such a great career instead of counting the days till they can retire. So.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And I just want to say Project PACT, if you go to projectpact.org, we've kicked off our ambassador program. If you're a police in any level and you believe kind of in this movement, in what we're trying to do, and to bring about the benefits and the partnership between police and community together, and you want to be an ambassador for us, fill out the information, send that to us. We're looking for people who are forward thinking, who are shaping their own community and out and working with community. You might be a community leader. You'll see on the ambassador page that we have judges and people working in restorative training and all kinds of things. We intend to make this also an expansion of what is good in every community, every state, every nation.
I just want to say, too, if you're just a citizen and you want to be an ambassador, give us a call or fill out the form. I don't care. You can call me or you can email me or Kristin. That's fine. But I don't care if you think you want to support what Project PACT is about in terms of developing healthy communities and shifting and changing cultures in police and community. If that's what you want to support, you can become an ambassador, and we'll be happy to accommodate that. We'll put your picture online. Maybe that's not something you want, but we'll talk a little bit about you and go from there because we do need that kind of support. We want people to know that this is a rallying movement towards something that's transformative, not temporary, not seasonal, but that's long-lasting and sustainable.
So thank you, Mike and Kristin, and thank you all for listening. If you would give us a review, we'd appreciate that. That moves us a little further down the road as we take on this beautiful project, this long-lasting really shift in thoughtfulness and caring for others and really establishing safe communities that belong to everyone. So thank you for tuning in. And that's another one, Beyond the Band-Aids.